Welcome to the special session on new discoveries from shared data. So this sounds like as soon as I hear the word data, I think complicated, technical. So what we're trying to do with this session is really highlight some of the value that comes from sharing data, the new discoveries that can arise, and how researchers and different groups are involved and what type of work they're doing in the field of data sharing. And we've got a fantastic panel to do that with. I'm going to start with just a few notes to set the scene. So my name's Angie Bradshaw. I work at Alzheimer Europe. I do a lot of work on different research projects, different policy angles to do with data and data sharing. So this is a little bit of a favorite area for me, and hopefully I can inspire you to be just as interested. So I wanted to start off with a question. To you. So I should have had a Menti, but I don't, so bear with me. But I'd like you to raise your hands and, think about, in your seats, think about a few words that come to mind when I say the words data sharing. So data sharing, what does that make you think? You know, is it technical? Is it open? How does it make you feel? And if you are comfortable to share, put your hands up and hopefully a microphone will appear. Is there a microphone in the house? Yep, but the actual microphone? Can I? Okay, I'll get it. And it's on.
Thank you. I probably think of it from a totally different angle, but the horror of ethics applications and data sharing, which me and he's been going through very recently, and the idea of like putting everything in place to make sure that data is not obviously unlawfully or unethically shared. But that's what pops into my head as a qualitative researcher. I'm like, oh God, all that information that I've got to try and protect.
Okay, that's great. So we have some issues. Ethics, we also have horror. Which wasn't something that I was expecting. One more, anyone else? Thank you.
Hello, Sirpa Tapaninen. I'm an M&E specialist, and in my world, data needs to be applicable and usable, which means that it also needs to be understandable.
Excellent. So understandable, access, equity maybe as well. Maybe one final person in the front row.
Yeah, I just had 4 letters, GPDR. That's in line with
Yeah, so GDPR in French is the RGPD, and it sounds like it causes uniform horror, pain, suffering to many. On the other hand, it kind of protects us as well. So, you know, two sides to every story. You know what, I'm going to stand here because then I can see the screen. So when I think of data sharing, I chose this picture not just because it's everywhere in this conference, it's the city we're in, but I can see lots of analogies to data sharing in this picture. So those of you who do stuff with data, you might use the cloud, right? Clouds. You might store data in a data lake, although this isn't the lake, it's a sea, but you know, semantics. Data is about people. Data is from people, data belongs to people, right? Those people might be participants in studies, traveling in these cars, small studies, bigger studies, even bigger studies. As researchers, as patients, as clinicians, as data platforms, data initiatives, we have to navigate this landscape. I have a terrible sense of direction. I get lost very, very easily. And you can see that Helsinki is built on many different levels, with Old Town, New Town, all spread out. And this whole picture, for me, recapitulates a data ecosystem. And today, what I hope we'll achieve is sharing some insights about the concept of that data ecosystem in dementia research, and what harnessing the power of that data ecosystem through sharing, through your use, through secondary data analyses, can bring to us as a community. So, one last introduction slide to set the scene. The concept of data sharing isn't a new one. Even before computers or the technologies we use nowadays, health economists used to perform secondary analyses on data from government reports. Meteorologists used to share information about the weather through much less technological channels. However, our technological abilities have grown vastly, and so has the size of research data sets. So on this arrow, or on this line, you can see a timeline of the dementia research datascape, and you can see how it's expanded over time. So in 1906, Alois Alzheimer presented the outcome of a study with one participant, Auguste Deter, whose name we all know. Moving forward quite a few years, in 1972, this was a study involving 48 participants in 2 different groups. Drachman and Leavitt showed that the consistent progressive memory loss in Alzheimer's is different from the mild memory loss that you have in healthy aging. In 1993, moving forward into a more maybe biological age, a study with 174 participants showed that ApoE4 is a major genetic risk factor for late-onset Alzheimer's disease. And they did this by showing that the ApoE4 protein could stick to clumps of amyloid. 174 participants. Fast forward to the present day, or close to the present day. We've all heard about clinical trials. The phase 2 trial of lecanemab, 856 participants. You go up to a cohort study, the EPAD study, for example, which was looking at the longitudinal disease course, just under 2,000 participants, and Stina's going to tell us about that later on. Then you also have things like the UK Biobank, which contains data, samples, information from over 500,000 people living in the UK. And with this expansion in the size of studies, we've also expanded the types of endpoints, the types of things we're measuring. We can do so much more. We're generating so much more data. And I think what I would like to share most importantly is that we really need to harness the value of this data. That data has value to the primary studies, but by reusing that data, we're honoring the contributions of the participants about whom that data is. So just before I pass on to the actual speakers, I'm going to show a tiny bit about a recent piece of work that we did about data sharing in Europe, and I'm talking about money now. So the Horizon 2020 research and development program, very, very large budget, and the total budget for dementia research within that portfolio, all types of dementia research, we found by doing an analysis of Cordis data, exceeded 570 million euros, a lot of money. 222 research projects, partners across 30 countries, this was pre-Brexit, and 73% of that funding went to research projects that involved the generation or reuse of clinical data, or I'm calling it clinical, but it can also be data from qualitative research as well. So it's all different types of research, but data about us, about human beings, about patients. So there's huge potential for added value and impact. There's huge investment, there's huge amounts, and now we need to think about good mechanisms, horror of GDPR, to share data across borders, between sectors, so that that value is realized for the benefit of patients. So I'm just going to flash through a couple of slides. So there are some other efforts to sort of catalog research. This is one, this is called EPND, cohort catalog, 74 different cohorts in the catalog, over 230,000 participants represented. And this is the Dementia's UK data portal, which Sarah will be talking about, and I'll leave her to give you some more detail there. So to finish, well, for me to finish, these guys are going to start. Here is the panel, and I think in the interest of time and without further ado, I'll hand over to Sarah Bauermeister, who's going to be talking us, well, it says UK Biobank, but I think you're going to talk about DPUK as well. Yeah. Maybe, yeah. You can. Would you rather have that, or?
It's what you prefer, I don't mind.
Whatever you like.
Okay, I'm quite animated. I'll take this. Okay. So thank you very much for this invitation. And I think that it's really important to have these sessions and these talks, because what they do is really tell the research community about the data sharing opportunities beyond just the lab. Now, I know your own labs and your own data collections and small studies are incredibly important, but to be able to harness existing data sets to extend your research is equally valuable as well. So for my sins, I am Senior Data Manager and Senior Scientist for DPUK. I'm also an Associate Professor at the Department of Psychiatry. And importantly, I run 2 major programs of work, and across 20 researchers work across my programs, and I use DPUK for running my programs. So I hope today I can tell you a bit about DPUK, but also how to harness it for research programs, which I run all across the world. How do I go on? Okay, right. Amazing. So very quickly, DPUK is a data repository for cohort data. We have over 65 population and clinical cohorts across 3.5 million individuals. And what we do is we take the horror out of accessing secondary data, and we also control the GDPR issues for researchers. So these are things that researchers don't have to worry about, because we worry about that for them, and we can just allow researchers to crack on with the important research which is required for dementia. And so researchers can access data sets on DPUK through identifying cohorts of interest through our cohort matrix, where this is a very snapshot overview of what is present and absent across 18 categories of data. So researchers come along, this is the first step in their journey, they have a look and they think, for example, airwave, fantastic. They've got information in these top levels of categories of our ontology or data model. And then they can go along to the cohort directory. So they've identified, for example, ELSA is suitable, and they can find out a little bit more information about the longitudinal collections of the data set that they have identified. And then within these, they can look at the individual variables on the left, again, according to our ontology. So what we're trying to do for researchers is provide them with informative tools to identify cohorts of interest. This is not moving on. No? I mean, I probably can talk without slides, but I don't think... Was that the green one? I think that was the green one. Okay, so then once researchers have identified their cohorts of interest, we invite them to submit a full project proposal, which goes out to our cohort owners. DPUK does not own the data. We always emphasize that. We allow the ownership to stay with the cohorts. All we do is we are a data access and management repository where researchers can apply for the data for dementia's research. Once they have at least one cohort approved, we give them a virtual desktop. And this is a snapshot of the virtual desktop. It includes pre-installed statistical packages, including Stata, which a lot of you know here is expensive, R, MATLAB, Python, Jupyter notebooks, you name it. If we haven't got it, we'll get it for you. And this is all free, and all you need is an internet access. And where this is really valuable is for countries, low middle income countries, which don't have the resources to access these large cohorts, because we do the storage and the processing for researchers. So this is an example of my own desktop, actually. These are all the projects that I've got, which I know is far too many. But I've burst out the example of one of my projects, and you can see there's DPUK cohorts and non-DPUK cohorts there. So researchers can bring in their own data sets. So we don't own them. They just bring them in, they run their project, and then they take them away again. And this means my researchers from all across the world can access the same data within this project folder. Doesn't matter if they're in Australia, India, or the UK. What can they take off the portal? This is always a question. Well, number one, not the data, because we look after the data for the cohort owners. But what they can take out are figures, scripts, code, and output and graphs for publication and presentation purposes. And what's really valuable also about DPUK is that when you have researchers working across the world on coding, cleaning data, they can all share the code in a secure environment. So you can share this. They don't have to all be cleaning the data individually on their desktop. And feedback from researchers is exactly what was brought up this morning, is that it's secure. I don't have to worry that it's on a hard drive that I've lost, I can't remember the encryption code for. We look after it for researchers. This is our ontology, our data model, 18 categories. The reason DPUK developed an ontology was for our data visualization tools, but also to standardize cohort data. A lot of questions around the data is, but how can I compare cohort with another cohort? So what we do is we have a data model. We also have a small harmonized data set. There's often confusion across what is harmonization, what is standardization. DPUK does both. So we standardize the naming structure so that cohort data is comparable, but we only harmonize a small data set. Harmonization for a specific use case, and in this case, our cohort explorer. And this is the benefit and also the difficult side of harmonization. This is a list of our cohorts which we've harmonized data for, and there are many gaps. So when you start to harmonize, it's sort of like apples and pears. You know, depression in one cohort where they've used a standard scale is fantastic, but in another cohort, they've maybe only asked someone, have you been depressed in the last 2 weeks? And they're not always comparable. So we undertake this work. It's a huge program of work, actually funded by Gates Ventures. So we're very grateful to the funders for funding this huge program of work. And this highlights the difficulties of harmonization versus standardization. If we just look at, let's take an example, education across 4 exemplar cohorts in DPUK. See how difficult our job is to actually standardize/harmonize these data sets. So hopefully the work that we're undertaking in DPUK will help researchers. Just a very quick snapshot of my research programs that use DPUK, because I presented on this early in the week, and I can't identify who's still in the audience. I've had to try and make it a little bit unique. Blossom is my early adversity and brain health program. I have multiple researchers working across this who've been awarded fellowships to work on the program within DPUK. And it's really looking at self-reported, retrospective early adversity, including sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and deprivation in childhood, and the effect on later life, which sadly is also implicated in dementia and cognitive decline. So one of the programs of work, you can see here on the left, we've used UK Biobank with a wonderful number of 479,000 individuals. And on the right-hand side, we've used ELSA. So we've not harmonized the data. The data sets are so huge, we don't need to harmonize. But this is validation work, where we show latent constructs or a concept or a factor of early adversity, and the impact, the deleterious impact on later life outcomes. So this is an example of the type of work that can be undertaken within the secure environment. This is longitudinal work, so we wanted to look at the concepts, the mechanisms of early adversity. Why is there this link between early adversity and later life? So here we're just focusing on rejection in the MRC NSHD cohort, and we're looking at longitudinal waves measured across 1989, 99, 2009 and 2015, and we find enduring negative effects on both cognition and mental health. These are the cohorts we're able to use for this program. Some are DPUK, some are non-DPUK. So the data corpus is huge, and the advantage of this data corpus is when you go to apply for a grant or a fellowship and you say that you're using DPUK with multiple cohorts, it really does strengthen your application. Another one, I can barely see what I'm... another study is perceived control during childhood is Oh, it's there. Why didn't I see that? You see, I get carried away. Okay, it's there. So this is to show you the capacity of DeepUK. It's not just survey clinical and population cohorts. We also analyze image data, genetic data, and both derived and non-derived phenotypes. And so here we were looking at maternal emotional neglect and the effect on later life cortical atrophy. And what we're really looking at is the effect physically on the brain in order to understand the mechanisms more clearly. And this work, I must give credit to Dr. Delia George, my postdoc. And here you can see that she has processed the data on the data portal. We've loaded up raw image data for her. She's used a Linux desktop. And you can see how she's gone through the processing pipeline on DeepUK. So we're not just a data repository for survey data. And I'm going to go through this quickly because I've been warned I've got 1 minute. And so what we found was that an increase in maternal control, and we don't mean caring control, we mean abusive control, was associated with cortical atrophy in the reward circuitry, in the reward regions of the brain, and also a decrease in well-being. Wow, I did that okay. And so anyway, I hope that gives you an understanding of the power of DeepUK, what can actually be achieved through accessing data sets on a platform where you're not having to find your own HPC cluster. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So I'm going to have to disappoint the audience and say, hold your questions until right at the end, just so that we make sure we get through everyone. And to the people online who I completely forgot to welcome, welcome. I'm gesturing at my iPad, just in case you can't see it. But yes, welcome to all the people online. And I'd like to welcome also Francesca Magalash. And you are the Executive Director of the Worldwide Fingers Global Scientific Coordinating Center and also geriatrician at the Karolinska.
Thank you. A very good morning to everyone. It's a big honor and a pleasure to be here. And it means a lot to me to be able to contribute to this session because, as I will show you, data sharing is the core of the Worldwide Finger work. You might have already seen this slide yesterday in the plenary, also in our Eurofinger symposium. But briefly, FINGER was a trial that in 2015 showed for the first time that a multi-domain approach aiming to improve lifestyle and vascular care can actually benefit cognition in older adults from the community at increased risk of dementia. And the benefit of such approach goes way beyond cognition because it protects against other chronic disabling condition and functional disability. So there is a huge potential. Now, FINGER was done in Finland, and as we publish, other research teams from across the world approach us to say, we would like to do the same. So Professor Mia Kivipelto, who is the PI of the FINGER, and it's also the scientific founder of the Worldwide Finger Network of multi-domain trial for dementia risk reduction and prevention, launched these initiatives in 2017. As you can see today, we have 61 countries that aims to adapt and test the FINGER model in different population, in different settings, seeing if this is feasible, it's safe, and is effective. The country that you see color in dark blue are countries with ongoing trials, while the light blue are countries with planned studies. And this is a graph to show you that when we started in 2017, we were only 5 countries. As of today, as I mentioned, we are 61, with pretty much every continent, of course excluding Antarctica. But that means we are faced with a lot of heterogeneity. So speaking to the previous speaker about the harmonization of data, that it's a very tricky business. Can we do this ahead before we start? This is called prospective harmonization that enables collection of good quality data that are also comparable. in order to facilitate that, at the Fingers Brain Health Institute, we created the Worldwide Finger Harmonization Guidelines. And we did this with the input of researchers across the whole globe. And this is, think of it as a live document, because we update it as we gain knowledge, and it's a sort of a manual to build a finger-like intervention. What are the pillars? We recommend to have a multi-domain intervention that target different modifiable factors related to vascular, metabolic health, and lifestyle. And the core feature of fingers should be there, but more intervention component could and should be added. It's also very important to ensure cultural and local adaptations, because what is feasible and sustainable in one country might not be the same in another. In the finger studies, we recommended Nordic walking for physical activity. In India, we're doing yoga. In Latin America, we're doing dance. So it's very important to do something that it's meaningful and easy to understand to engage the participant. The intervention delivery, whenever possible, should be done through individual and group session. In the individual session, there is the possibility to motivate the person, to understand what is meaningful, what could be prioritized, and how to adjust. So the approach to this multi-domain intervention is sustainable. But the group intervention are very meaningful. The peer support, the social stimulation, it's always the component that they like the most when we ask to our participants. They like to do things together. Of course, the use of randomized clinical trial design is recommended for a balanced comparison of the novel multi-domain approach to a standard group that nowadays is no longer let's say, regular healthcare, but is self-educational material that we provide. But we are also open to implementation studies, because some countries might not have the capacity to run a clinical trial. And our goal is to be very inclusive. So we are starting to think how implementation project can be foreseen in the network. And of course, the prospective harmonizations that I will cover more in a bit. But that means try to work together, so as we plan collection of data, we do this in the same way to the extent that this is possible. So within the network, the majority of the trial have the type of variable that you can see listed here. It's a very huge repository of trial data. And the prospective harmonization is supported by international working group. For each domain, we bring together experts from all over the world, the research team, but also outside, as long as they can help us to understand how standard information can be done, how best practice can be implemented, for the ultimate goal to do data sharing. Because we know that as large a trial can be, it's really not possible to do the type of analysis that we need to do to develop precision prevention, which means what works best for people with unique risk profile and prevention potential. So we need larger numbers, and that can only be achieved with collaborative effort. This is an example of the various group, the international working group of experts. Of course, we wanted to cover the cognitive outcome, because that's really a core aspect that we want to be able to compare. But you can see many other features. And although we have two only groups that are formally active, among the pending one, there is a lot of work going on to be able to set up and launch formally the group. Now, the piece of the data sharing. How do we actually do that? In this, we have a great partner, the Alzheimer's Disease Data Initiative. They develop a tool that is called Alzheimer's Disease Workbench. And it's a concept that implies a federated data system. Now, I'm just a doctor. It's not easy for me to explain data-related items. But my understanding of the federated system, it is that without moving the data from the location where they are owned, other researchers across the world can see what the data are, how they are coded and structured, and they can propose and run from their own institution a joint analysis using data from multiple data sets, and they can access the results. So this enables also preservation of data integrity, and speaking to the GDPR, it's safe in that sense. So the Alzheimer's disease workbench, it is already existing, and it contains already some data that are publicly available. As long as you register, you can see what is there. In the Worldwide Finger Network, we installed it in 3 countries, Sweden, UK, and Finland. We are now also partnering with ADDI to kind of make it more easier with countries that have limited IT resources to actually install it. And we are planning the installation in many other countries. We have a lot of interest from different partners, and we are also exploring the legal challenges, because if data don't move and GDPR-related issues might be no longer the main problem, the installation of a software that might be considered alien, but some institution might be a different type of challenge. But we're not giving up, because we know this is the only way forward. And as we build that, we start to do something on our own. How can we do the joint data analysis? Can we look already into some joint data? And we started to do that. This is an example of the finger and the MAPT trial. The MAPT was done in France and was also deploying a multi-domain intervention alone or together with omega-3 supplement. And we wanted to look, how is the adherence to these 2 trials that were different, especially for the level of intensity, because in MAP there was a lot of counseling. In finger, it was much more intensive. And here you can see the adherence to the different component that is higher for the cardiovascular monitoring and is lower for the cognitive training. But overall, if you look at the simultaneous adherence, it's pretty good in both trials. And we wanted to know what is facilitating or hindering the adherence to trial. And what we could see is that in finger, older age and being a current smoker was associated to lower adherence, while having intermediate education as compared to low was facilitating adherence. While in MAP, the presence of depressive symptoms and being a current smoker was associated with reduced adherence. So the main message here is that we know from that adherence, it's key to really achieve a beneficial response. And so if we identify barriers and facilitator, then we can model the intervention to support the adherence by targeting the people that struggle the most. Another example of the pool analysis. Here we'll look at 2 data sets. Again, finger and MIND-AD. MIND-AD was quite interesting because we did the study in prodromal Alzheimer's disease people. And we wanted to see if occupational complexity was associated to cognition. Occupational complexity relates to the mental and social challenges that people deal with in daily life. And in finger, we saw that people that in their working period were exposed to mentally demanding job, they might actually respond better to specific aspect of the intervention. But again, finger is too small. So we started to look at these 2 trials together. Does occupational complexity measure with all of these names up here relate to cognition? And we could see that there is a positive association. In general, higher occupational complexity might mean some better cognition, although this seems to be mostly true for people in the pre-dementia stage. But this is just an example to show that data pooling and data harmonization is possible. Finally, ApoE. Mia already showed that the ApoE epsilon-4 carrier responded better to the intervention in finger and in MAP trial. There has been a recent meta-analysis show that in multi-domain lifestyle trial, ApoE carrier benefit the most. And last July, we saw at the EIC that also in the Japanese finger, ApoE carriers benefit the most. So we're looking at very different ethnicities, and still the message is the same. This non-modifiable genetic risk can be fight by a multi-domain lifestyle intervention. That was all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Francesca. And so I love the fact that this showed that harmonization and pooling can give us novel insights into things we might not have thought of initially. So what makes it easier to adhere to a multi-domain intervention? Are there particular facets of what we do on our everyday lives that are more or less beneficial? And also, another thing, a really key topic for our conference yesterday, for the last few days, has been inclusion and diversity. So scale is important, inclusion is important, representation is important. Our data sets need to be diverse so we can really understand the outcomes for individuals. With all that being said, I'm passing to a new population, and we have Sandar Aye from the Karolinska Institute, who's going to tell us about the SveDem study, which is a population registry.
Thank you for the introduction. Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to present our award in Alzheimer Euro Conference. And I'm Stina Saunders. I am a PhD student at Karolinska Institute. And I am also a health economist, so my presentation I will talk about how we can use this population-based registry in our economic analysis and to inform the decision-making. So I will start introducing about what is the Swedish Dementia Registry. And this is the population-based national quality registry which started in May 2007 with an aim to improve care and management of dementia in Sweden. SveDem published the annual report regularly, which we can see, which if we're interested, we can download it from this address and to see how many people we have and how the care and treatment look like. So up to the end of 2012, we have around 112,000 people with dementia and mild cognitive impairment registered in the registry, which includes all the baseline registration and follow-up information. SveDem started to include the registrations of mild cognitive impairment starting from April last year. So now we have around 1,500 MCI patients registered in the registry. In terms of coverage, the SveDem could cover all the memory clinics in Sweden and more than around 80% of primary healthcare clinics and most of the nursing homes in Sweden. So this is a very huge and rich data set. What is unique about SveDem is that in SveDem we follow patients starting from they get the diagnosis, and then we have the measurement of the cognition, mainly the mini-mental state examination for every follow-up, so we can analyze the information longitudinally. And another good point is that since we can follow the patients along all the continuum of care, starting from specialists and the home care, so we can see how the patient progress over time. And the most advantage is that we can link this information from SveDem with other registry available. For example, with the national cost of the registry to study the modality, or with the administrative data to see the resource utilization. And then we have additional module added in SveDem, which is to be ready for the new upcoming treatment, which if it is approved in near future. So as a health economist, so what we can use this, how we can apply this existing registry to our health economic model. And first, I will talk about why we need economic modeling in Alzheimer's disease. I think everyone here is already aware about the emerging new treatments and emerging blood-based biomarkers in this Alzheimer's disease phase. Although we have the clinical trial data to show the drug effectiveness, but the long-term effect of the treatments on disease progression, especially on the institutionalization and modality, which we don't understand currently and which we could not know from the clinical trial. And we also don't know how integrating of this new blood-based biomarker in current clinical care could optimize the current diagnosis and treatment practice. In that sense, we need decision analytic modeling to inform what is the long-term impact in our health system and in the patient outcome. So I will talk about one of our research, which we use the data from the Swedish Dementia Registry in our model to study the cause-specific mortality in Alzheimer's disease and the consequences of this cause-specific mortality in the economic evaluation of these new treatments. I will start with our motivation of the research. So we all know that the Alzheimer's disease reduces survival and the mortality is increased with age, with disease severity, and increase with number of comorbidity. And we also know that the common causes of that in Alzheimer's disease include the disease itself and cardiovascular disease and respiratory disease and so on. What we don't know here is that we don't know the mechanism behind the increased mortality in Alzheimer's disease, which leading to the challenges in modeling and predicting the impact of this disease-modifying treatments. And this information we could not find in the clinical trials because of the insufficient follow-up time and to detect the difference in the mortality. On the other hand, AD is a complex disease which usually coexists with multimorbidities. So in that sense, if the mortality in Alzheimer's disease could contribute by the disease itself and also can be contributed by the existing comorbidity. So in this research, we would like to know what is the overall and cause-specific mortality in Alzheimer's disease and how this mortality relate to the disease severity and how can we translate this mortality into the modeling of the cost-effectiveness of treatments. The hypothesis behind this is that we assume that if some type of cause-specific mortality increase with the disease severity or increase with the disease progression, we can assume that this cause of death is associated with the disease pathology. So if a disease-modifying treatment have an effect on the disease progression, which had an effect on reducing the mortality, that treatment can reduce not only the mortality caused by Alzheimer's disease itself, it can also reduce the mortality caused by other related comorbidities. So with that in mind, we analyzed the data from the Swedish Dementia Registry, linking it with the National Cause of Death Registry. Cause of Death Registry data from January 2008 to December 2018. And we used cost regression model for the overall mortality, multinomial logistic regression for cost-specific mortality, and Markov microsimulation for the cost effectiveness. What we see is that the overall mortality in Alzheimer's disease increased with disease severity. Here we measure it with mini-mental state examination, MMSE score. Of course, there are also other factors associated with mortality like age, measles, and small BMI and higher number of medication. When we look at the cause of death in Alzheimer's disease, the most commonly reported cause of death include the cardiovascular disease, dementia disease, cancer, and respiratory causes of death. And then how these different causes of death relate to the disease progressions. On the right side, then the analysis show that all causes of death are related to the MMSE score or the disease severity, except the kidney cause and endocrine cause. This is because these causes of death in this specific cohort is the sample size is quite low, that we suspect that it will be due to the small sample size in this cohort. But in this analysis, we could say that nearly all causes of death in Alzheimer's disease is increased. So with that data, we developed a simple 4-stage Markov model to use different causes of to see how different causes of death impact the cost effectiveness of this new treatment. We made 3 assumptions here. The scenario 1 is that this treatment would will directly affect the mortality through a reduction on the disease progression. The scenario 2 is that we assume that the treatment will have no effect on the mortality. And the scenario 3, we assume that the treatment will indirectly affect the dementia-specific mortality, but no effect on other causes of death. So this is the simulation from the model, and it clearly shows that if the treatment have an effect on the reduction of the mortality, the survival is higher than assuming no effect on the mortality. And this is, we split the survival into different disease stage, and this is quite similar to the previous slide. And when we look at the cost effectiveness of the treatment based on different assumptions, so in health economics, the result we express in ISA, which is incremental cost effectiveness ratio, we can clearly see that let's ignore the number, because here we apply the current announced price of disease-modifying treatment in the model. So the ISA is very high, but what we would like to interpret here is that based on the 3 different scenarios, the scenario 1, which assumes disease-modifying treatment have an effect on mortality, has the lowest ISA among the 3 scenarios. The conclusion here is that based on the different assumptions on the effect on mortality, it will affect the cost effectiveness of these new treatments, and different effects on mortality should be considered in the future economic models. This paper, we have published it in early this year, so if you are interested in that, you could have a look in that. In addition to that, we also have an example on how we could use the Swedish Dementia Registry to provide information on how long patient will live in each state, because this information is quite important. If a patient comes to the clinic in a specific disease state and they want to know how long they will live. So take-home message is that this existing population registry could provide solid-based evidence for health economics modeling, and then the registry could be used to evaluate future interventions and therapeutic options. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandar. And so clearly, health data can be reused for different purposes, including health economic modelling, and can be reused by HDA regulators and others to make decisions about what medicines we can access. And our final speaker is Stina Saunders from Linus Health and the University of Edinburgh, and she'll be talking about EPAD, a project that Alzheimer Europe partnered in.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I know we're nearly running out of time, so I'll be a little bit more brief than I planned with my talk, but luckily some of the things I was going to mention have been referenced in the previous talk, so I can go over those quicker. My name is Stina. I used to work on a study called European Prevention of Alzheimer's Dementia for quite a few years. I worked in different elements of the study, particularly in trial delivery, so seeing the participants, but today I'll be talking about the data sharing element of the study. So those of you who are maybe familiar with the study, European Prevention of Alzheimer's Dementia, or EPAD, was initiated in 2015 as a proof of concept platform trial. So to achieve that aim of the proof of concept trial, then the study set up a register and then a longitudinal cohort study. I will particularly be talking about the longitudinal cohort study, which recruited over 2,000 research participants. The recruitment and follow-up assessments finished in 2020 March with the start of COVID. So the drug studies that were initially intended for this platform study did not start. So this was a massive initiative with a budget of 64 million euro, 39 partners across 8 European countries. I will talk about the data set that is available freely for use from the EPAD longitudinal cohort study, and then the biobank for the samples, and then I will talk about participant engagement also, which was incredibly important for the longevity of the study, and I think it's a nice sort of message to finish the session with as well, in which Angela referenced at the start. So this is just an overview of the depth of phenotyping in the study. So the main outcome measures were around cognition, which was the R-bands tool. There was also a collection of biomarker outcomes, neuroimaging outcomes, sort of socio-demographic outcomes, and a really in-depth data set. I think it's important to appreciate what is involved for a participant when they come through to a study like this, to get that incredibly rich data set. So I will just show sort of briefly that when a participant engages with the study, they receive a phone call, which might last a good 20 minutes, particularly for the sake of EPAD, because the idea was that we collect data for the longitudinal monitoring of disease progression, but also should there be a drug study that people are eligible for, then people would have their results disclosed. So people would find out their amyloid status, their APOE4 status, because that may make them eligible for drug studies. So it was a really important decision for people to make if they want to know their results. So a lot to consider at the start. So people came in to the study center with their study partner who would help in providing information for some of the outcome measures that we use, such as the clinical dementia rating scale. Then they were fasted, they hadn't had breakfast, we took their biological samples, saliva samples, urine samples at the start, blood samples. And then people were given breakfast. Then they saw the study doctor who performed a couple of assessments. Then people had a break. Then they had an MRI scan, which was about an hour, which is another sort of big thing to do for a lot of participants, which some of the participant experiences are related to as well, which I'll, if I have time, I'll show in a minute. Then people had a lunch break and they undertook about 3 hours of cognitive assessments to achieve the incredibly rich sort of deeply phenotyped data set. On a separate day, people came back to do a lumbar puncture for the CSF sample. So I think it's important, like at the start of this session we mentioned, what really is involved for a participant to achieve that one row of a data set in the CSV file, you know. So the EPAD data, I won't stop on it for long because Francesca gave a good overview already of the ADDI platform called AD Workbench. Similarly to DPUK, then the data set doesn't need to leave the environment. You can do your analysis on the data set, and there's the statistical packages as well. So this is just a very practical pointer that to access this data set, then the latest data set is called EPAD-V.IMI data set. So this is a baseline overview of the baseline characteristics of the participants in this cohort. 1,843 participants are baseline who did not screen fail, although over 2,000 were screened. So the average age is 65, and they were fairly equally female, between female and male. But I want to point out that 37% of this sample is amyloid positive, which is quite a unique data set for a preclinical population. So as I mentioned, the study follow-ups as well as recruitment finished in 2020. So this is just again an overview of how many participants reached a particular time point in the study assessments. So the data set, as I mentioned, is freely available. I do want to emphasize, we also spoke about the horror of accessing data, that the data requests are processed within a day on the AD Workbench. Image requests are about a month. So this is how the data are being used at the moment. There have been 180 data requests from 22 countries. There's over 42 publications and counting, and many more papers and conference abstracts to date. I also quickly mentioned that whilst the main EPAD study funding has finished, then there is a follow-on study called EPAD Scotland, and initiatives are ongoing to bring the study up again in the original countries where EPAD ran. The protocol is near identical to the original EPAD study for the purposes of not having to go through the pain of data harmonization. Then EPAD Biobank holds more than 100,000 samples of CSF, blood, and saliva and urine. 7 sample access requests have been made so far, and these are held in at the Roslin Institute in Edinburgh. The data, the samples access process is detailed on this slide. I won't go through it anymore, rather than to say, if you're interested in accessing the samples, then do make an initial sort of informal inquiry. And Josie is the best person to email to ask about access to these samples. Now, this is my final point, and it's kind of nice to finish on this sentiment. As we mentioned at the start, the data belongs to the people who have gone through the effort of going through several days of assessments, lumbar punctures, MRI scans. So it's not only an obligation to share the data, but also to use the data. So I'm showing a photo of one of the EPAD meetings where quite a few of these people are EPAD participants. EPAD very much worked under the sort of premise that participants are collaborators in the study, and they will ensure the longevity of the study. If participants are happy, they're happy to come back to a longitudinal study. We have also published on our model of involving participants in research, and we do believe that this sort of really meaningful engagement of participants should be included in any longitudinal study. So the aim of the panel, just very briefly, is to provide feedback, weigh in on decision-making, such as sub-studies to EPAD, communicate about the study in conferences, and offer retention ideas. Now, I do have a video, but I may just skip it. Okay, thank you. So this is, yes, it's 2 participants talking about their experiences. I do think it's important to bring that human element in, so there you go.
My name is Brian Ingalls, and I am a participant in the EPAD project based in Edinburgh. To be honest, I did think long and hard before I actually joined the study, because I'm a little bit claustrophobic. I'm adverse to risk. However, I thought about it, and because it was such a worthwhile project, and potentially it could have a real positive impact on not only my grandchildren, but also my children as well, I decided to participate, and very glad I did.
Well, I'm one of those baby boomers who then went into further education with a lot of help from my parents, who were, I was the first one through university, you know, from the family, and consequently, I think education's always meant a lot to me. And research I got into just because I was working in a school where they were doing some research on early learning. You go along regularly to see the team, you get to know them, and they are a delight, an absolute delight, and it's so lovely to be with young people. It really is, and that's one of the things that they keep telling you when you're retired. Keep your, know people across the age range, and do things with them, do things that are worthwhile. So I work at a wildlife centre, I work with young people there, I work with young people with EPAD, and it's just a very, very worthwhile thing to do. And yes, there is the MRI, and yes, there is the lumbar puncture, but the staff are so reassuring.
Thank you. And brief overview of our findings, which are all detailed much more in the paper that my presentation is drawing from. And I just finished with key messages that, as I mentioned, EPAD works on the principle that samples shouldn't just be stored indefinitely, but they should be used. And there shouldn't be any costly requirements or incredibly timely processes to go through. And data sharing, as I said at the start, represents the wishes of the participants. Participants want the data to be made use of, so to use the data. So I acknowledge the funder, Innovative Medicines Initiative for EPAD, and thank you for your attention.
Well, with no further ado, because lunch is waiting, I'd like to thank the audience. I'd like to thank our fantastic panel. And, I was going to try and steal your last slide, Stina, because you say, and I can't read it anymore, but what we're doing with data sharing is honouring the contribution of research participants for the benefit of future generations and current generations as well. So let's all continue working together, and I look forward to continuing this conversation at the next conference. Thank you very much, and have a lovely lunch.